Good evening. Thank you. Hello. Welcome. My name is Sarah Bowman, and I work here at the Monroe County Public Library. And I would just like to welcome everybody to this evening's Wintertelling event. A few things I would like to say first. First of all, if you have a cell phone, if you could put it on silent, mute, off, uh, whatever works best so it doesn't interrupt a storyteller in the middle of a story. A few other things I would like to say before we get going this evening is I would like to thank the Friends of the Library. They make programming at the library for all ages possible, so we would really like to thank them. There's a table on your way outside with some information if you're interested in becoming a member of the Friends of the Library. I'd like to thank CATS for videotaping this evening's program. You can see this program on the Library Channel 3. You can check their schedule at catstv.net. And lastly, I would like to thank the Bloomington Storytellers Guild for being tonight's entertainment. Patty Callison from the Bloomington Storytellers Guild is here this evening, and she's going to go ahead and introduce you to the program. And I would like to, again, welcome you and remind you that after the stories are over, up on stage, we'll be having some refreshments and coffee, well, cookies and milk. Isn't that perfect? So I'd like to invite everybody to stay after the stories are over and get a chance to chat with the storytellers. And again, thank you. Patty Callison.
You are tall. Well, we're really thrilled that you all came out tonight for the Wintertelling. The Bloomington Storytellers Guild, which has been around in Bloomington, and we're all getting so old we can't remember, but we were thinking about 74 was the year that the guild sort of started up, and we are a loose group. Well, wait a minute, let me put that another way. We're a tight-knit group of storytellers who have a devotion to the art of storytelling and love to present that to you. And tonight you're going to hear a number of stories. Because of our literary background, so many of us have a literature background, we tend to tell a lot of folk tales. We also have some personal stories that occasionally get told. But as people were coming tonight, coming together with their stories, it looked like you were going to see a vast, varied group of all kinds of myths and legends and folk tales from around the world. These stories are ones that, since many of us have a literature background, we have found in folklore books that you can check out from the Monroe County Public Library sometime, and take a look at those. But we basically carry those stories around in our heads, and that's sometimes a dangerous place to be. So welcome tonight, and again, we want to thank the Friends of the Library and the two ladies who were sitting outside will be glad to make you a friend of the library if you would like to become a friend. But most of all, thank you for coming out on this winter night. Thank you for coming to Wintertelling, and we hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for coming out on this cold, blustery night. It was so wonderful to see all of your faces here to join us tonight for our winter telling. As Patty said, it's true, as a storyteller, sometimes when you read stories, they just kind of roll around in your head. And the one that I'm going to be sharing tonight is such a roller itself. I checked out the Mammoth Book of Fairy Tales in preparation for this program, and the very first tale in this collection of folk tales was a tiny, curious gem of a story, and I'm curious to see how you feel about it after it's done. It's a short story. It's by Lawrence Schimel, and this is an adaptation of it. The name of the story is A Bag of Poetry. So it started on a day when all was lost. All was lost. And Anya was sitting and she was straddled on a stone wall that surrounded the parking lot of the Safeway grocery store. And she had a bag of groceries. And she had a big, thick black marker. And she was scribbling poetry all over her bag. And as she was doing this, she noticed out of the corner of her eye a homeless man and his dog approaching her. And he came up and the dog sniffed her shoe and the man asked for change. And she looked up, and first she saw the dog, and the dog was black, and it had a brown spot which looked like it had balanced precariously on the top of its head, and then over time it just kind of slid over one eye. She couldn't resist it. And she looked at the man, and he was wearing these jolly green and red Christmas boxer shorts and a brown and black plaid flannel shirt that matched his dog. And she smiled at him, and he smiled back with wide, wondrous eyes. And she reached into her bag, and she gave him a loaf of bread. And then she reached into her bag, and she gave him a pound of roast beef. And his eyes grew even wider, and he said, "God bless you." And she looked at the dog, and she pulled into her bag, and she reached out, and she gave the dog a bone. And the dog wagged his tail, and he couldn't bark because he had the bone in his mouth. And they turned around, and they patted away. Finally, Anya's bus came, and she got on the bus, and it was empty, which was unusual. So she sat down, and she sat her bag next to her, and she reached in her bag, and she pulled out a book, and she started to read. And so when it was time for her stop, she looked up from her book, and she noticed that the crowd of people in the bus was weighing in on her, and she tried to make her way through the crowd to get out of the door. Well, this woman pushed and pushed and pushed Anya until her bag fell. And at that moment, everyone stopped, silent, waiting for her groceries to come tumbling out. Well, the moment waited too long, and it lasted too long. And the woman pushed her aside, and as she walked off the bus, 17 eggs rolled out of the top of Anya's bag, and they rolled across the sidewalk, and they landed next to a building, each one uncracked. And a flock of pigeons flew down to the eggs, and they started pecking at the eggs. And first they ate the creamy yellow inside, and then they gobbled up the shells. When Anya bent down to retrieve the bags, she gave them a handful of popcorn, and she walked to home. And when she got into her apartment, her mother was glad to see her. She was so glad that she followed Anya right next to her shoulder to see what she brought from the grocery store. So Anya put her bag down on the counter. And the first thing that Anya reached in and brought out was a new job for her brother, Peter. Her mother gasped. She couldn't believe it. She ran around the other side of the counter, and she took Anya in her big, beefy, soft, warm arms, and she pinned Anya's arms to her sides and said, "This is wonderful." And she yelled, "Peter." And Anya kept getting things out of her bag. First, she reached in and she got a big bag of potatoes. And then she reached in and she got a big flour sack. And then she got 17 cobs of corn. And then she got 3 quarts of milk and she set them aside. And then Anya pulled out the moon and she set it on the counter. And her mother thought it was a saucer, so she took some of the milk and she poured it. And then she took the moon and she put it on the floor. And Anya noticed this. And so Anya reached into her bag and she pulled out 5 kittens. And her mother looked over her shoulder and said, "What's that?" And she said, "It's kittens." And she's like, "We have too many kittens." And just as she said that, cats came from everywhere, in through the window, from all the halls and from the cupboards. They came flooding in towards the saucer of milk. Meanwhile, her brother Peter came in, bleary-eyed. He'd been asleep all day. And his mother smiled and picked up the new job and took Peter into the living room. Anya kept putting away the groceries until nothing was left in the saucer. And so she picked up the moon and she went into the backyard to put it back into the sky. Meanwhile, her mother came into the kitchen and everything was gone, save for the bag. And so her mother went to the bag and looked inside, thinking, surely she can't pull anything else from this bag. And so she collapsed it and neatly folded it along the creases. And because she couldn't read the poetry, threw it out. And that's the story of the bag of poetry. Thank you for listening.
Hello, everyone. My story is from Africa. We believe it is Zulu, but we are not sure. It is called the Sky Woman's Basket. I hope you enjoy it. Once upon a time, there was a farmer. This farmer had a very large farm that he tended all by himself. He enjoyed taking care of his vegetables and all of his animals, but his favorite thing to tend was his herd of cattle, because in the morning he would go to the barn, unlock the door, go inside, and he would milk his cows. And from their milk, he would make cheese and yogurt and ice cream. Well, one morning, our farmer went to the barn, opened the door, and he tried to milk his cows, but he couldn't. They were dry as a bone. He thought this was odd, but he let them outside, took them to really rich green grass on the far corners of his farm. But the next morning, they were dry again. And now our farmer became suspicious that someone had, in the middle of the night, stolen the milk from his cows. So the next evening, instead of locking the barn door and going back to his farmhouse, he locked the barn door from the inside and creeped over to a corner and hid behind a bale of hay. And he waited and waited and waited until just past midnight, a star rose up in the sky and came to hover over the farmer's barn. And it shot a ray of light through the roof of the barn down to the floor below. And that ray of light started to spin and twist until it formed the shape of a ladder. Our farmer stood in amazement and dismay as he watched that ladder. Down from it came many, many beautiful women. And they came and they started to milk his cows dry. And he jumped up and said, "Stop, thieves! What are you doing?" And all of the women scurried up the ladder to the safety of the star, except for one, which he was able to grab by the heel and pull down to him. The star floated away as our farmer turned this beautiful woman toward him and said, "Woman, you have stolen from me." And she said, "Yes, I have. I'm sorry. What can I do to repay this debt?" He said, "Well, you could stay here with me and help me on my farm." She said, "All right, that is fair." So for several months, the man and the woman worked together on the farm, tending the vegetables, caring for the cows, until one day our farmer went to the woman and he said, "Sky Woman, you have worked very hard for me, and you have repaid your debt. You may go if you wish. But as we have worked together in these past few months, I have grown quite fond of you, and I would be most pleased if you would stay here with me and be my wife." Our Sky Woman said, "Well, I was hoping that you would say something like that. You are a good man, and this is a good world. I will stay here with you on one condition." "What's that?" asked the farmer. Anything. She said, well, I own this basket that is shut tight with a lid. In it is a secret that belongs to me. You must never open my basket without my permission. If you can promise me that, I will stay with you. Well, our farmer thought this was an easy thing to promise. So he said, yes, of course. And they were married. And they lived together happily for quite some time. But you know how it is with a secret. Every time our farmer would pass the basket that was sitting in the corner of the living room, he would wonder, what is inside that thing? Is it something wonderful, beautiful, or is it something terrible and evil? He didn't know, and he would look to the Sky Woman for clues, but she had none to give. This secret began to eat at him, and eat at him, and eat at him, until he began to think, this is my house. She is my wife, and this is my basket. And then one day, when our Sky Woman was out tending the fields, he went to the corner of the room. He kneeled down, and he lifted the lid of the basket and looked inside. Well, when he saw what was in there, he was dismayed and aghast, and he burst out laughing. And he laughed, and he laughed, and he laughed, and he laughed, until the Sky Woman heard him and came running, burst into the room, and saw what he had done. And she said, husband, you have broken your promise. And he said, wife, oh wife, this secret has been eating at me, and it has had me in suspicion of you. I didn't know if there was something good or evil inside it. I'm sorry, but I just felt I had to know. And I must say, I can't believe it. I look inside this basket, and there is nothing inside. You are so silly. Well, our Sky Woman said nothing, and she crossed the room, put the lid back on, lifted the basket, and walked away, never to be seen again by our farmer. And some people say that she left him because he had broken a promise. And a promise is a promise. But other people say that she left him because when he looked in the basket, he saw nothing there. For we are oftentimes blind to the treasures of others. And that is the story of the Sky Woman's basket.
Well, you are a treasure, Addie, and we are not blind to that. Very nicely done. My name is Stephanie Holman, and I have 3 short stories sprinkled throughout your program tonight. And so, for the first sprinkle. Once long ago, a poor man was walking along a road by himself, looking down, thinking about his situation. And because he was looking down, he was able to see, there by the side of the road, a pouch, a leather purse. And no one around. He stooped and picked it up, and he could tell by the heft of it. He wondered by the clinkety-clank of it if it might not be filled with coins. And when he opened it, indeed it was filled with gold coins. And with no one else there to claim it, he put it in his pocket and headed home. Well, the next morning he went to the village to spend his newfound wealth. Many things did he need. But no sooner had he gotten to the marketplace than there was a sign freshly painted, and it said, "Lost. Purse filled with gold coins. reward for its return. And it was signed by the richest man in town. That poor man was slumped and headed for home. He sat at his table and he looked at those coins in that pouch and he thought about what was the right thing to do. He thought, that rich man, he's so wealthy, he wouldn't even miss this money, and I'm so poor I could really use this money. But it is the right thing to return it, and it did say a reward. Maybe there'd be just enough for him to get by. So he headed over to the rich man's house and knocked upon the door. And the man himself opened the door and looked down upon this beggar, this man in tattered clothing, a waif of a man. He was so thin, carrying his purse of gold. He snatched it from the man and started counting it in his hand, and he thought to himself, look at this fool standing here before me. He probably thinks there's a reward. No, there's no reward. I just wrote that on there so that I get my coins back. But I'll give this man a lesson. That will be his reward. I'll teach him a lesson. And so the rich man counted out the coins, and when he'd finished, there were 100 coins, and he said, 100, and put them back in the pouch and closed it tight. And he said, what are you waiting for? And the poor man said, well, the sign had said something about a reward. Ha! Said the rich man, a reward? You'll get no reward. In fact, you are nothing but a thief, and I will let everyone know in the village that you are a thief. What do you mean a thief? I returned your money. When I lost this gold purse of coins, it was filled with 200 gold coins, and now there are only 100. You saw me count them. You are nothing but a thief. And he turned to go back into his house. But the poor man reached out and stopped him from closing the door and said, listen, you don't have to give me a reward, and I don't even want a reward from you. But you can't call me a thief. You can't besmirch my name. We will go to the village judge, and we will let him decide. Fine, said the rich man. And they went not side by side, but together to the village judge. And the village judge listened to the rich man's story. And then he listened to the poor man's story. And then he thought about it. He'd been in this village a long time, and he knew this wealthy man, and he knew that he was up to no good. So he said, tell me, how many coins were in the purse you lost? And the rich man said, 200. And then he turned to the poor man and he said, tell me, how many coins were in the purse you found? 100. I saw him count them out myself. Aha! Then it is clear. The purse you lost is not the same as the purse he found. Give him back the purse he found. And so it was done.
That was a good one. They're all good ones. My name is Lisa Champelli, and the story that the program says that I'm telling tonight, The Peasant's Clever Daughter, a folktale collected by the Brothers Grimm, is indeed the story that I'm telling tonight. But the version that I'm telling is actually more closely related to the story called Rachel the Clever, which appears in a collection of Jewish folktales, which indicates that the story originates from Poland. But this story is actually pretty well traveled because I've found variations of this story in Greek folktales, and there's another version called The Fisherman's Clever Daughter and a collection of Czechoslovakian tales. So it's really a story that's made its way around the world. And I tell this version tonight in honor of the clever young women around the world and through time who have advised on public matters, often behind the scenes, and kept the peace at home as well. This is the story of Rachel the Clever. Once upon a time, there was a clever king who was so proud of his intellectual aptitude that he vowed to marry only the woman who was as clever as he. Now, one day, this king happened to be out traveling, and he stopped at an inn, and he overheard the innkeeper boasting about his very clever daughter. He, the innkeeper, claimed that there was no riddle that his daughter was not able to solve. Now, the king wondered about this because he was very fond of riddles and had posed many a riddle to many a person that they had not been able to solve. And he decided to challenge the innkeeper. He called him over and he said, "I have 3 riddles for you, and if your daughter can solve them, then you shall be handsomely rewarded. But if she is not able to solve them, you will lose your inn." Here are the riddles. The first is, what is the fastest thing? The second is, what is the richest thing? And third is, what is the dearest thing? I expect the answers by tomorrow. And the king left, leaving the innkeeper to ponder what the answers could possibly be. He fretted that Rachel would not know how to figure them out, but he brought the riddles to her, and she just smiled and said, "Father, don't worry. You're not going to lose your inn. Go back to the king and tell him that thought is the fastest thing, that life-giving earth is the richest thing, and that love is the dearest thing." And when the innkeeper told the answers to the king, he was astonished, for he had shared these riddles with many a noble and educated woman, and none had been able to come up with the correct answers that he sought. And yet he had vowed to marry a woman who was as clever as he. Did this mean that he, the king, was destined to marry the common innkeeper's daughter? He thought that perhaps he would give her another puzzle. And so he said to the innkeeper, "Tell your daughter well done, and give her these 10 eggs, and tell her that I would like to have them hatched out and the chicks brought back to me tomorrow." The innkeeper was very worried. How was his daughter ever going to do this? And when he told her what the king was asking, she just laughed. She said, "Father, go to the king and bring him these seeds of grain, and tell the king that if he can plant the seeds, grow them, and harvest them by tomorrow, then I will gladly bring him the 10 chicks so that he might feed them the ripe grain." The king was pleased with Rachel's answer, and he decided that it was time that they should meet. And he asked the innkeeper to have her come to the castle. But she should come in 3 days' time, and she should come neither walking nor riding, and she should come neither dressed nor undressed, and she should come bringing him a gift that is not really a gift. The innkeeper was growing weary of these riddles. They made his head hurt. But he was confident that Rachel would know the answers and know what to do. And indeed she did. She thought just a moment, and then she asked her father, "Would you please bring me a goat and some fishnet and 2 doves?" And the innkeeper did as she asked. And at the appointed time, she wrapped herself in the fishnet, and she sat on the goat with one leg dragging on the ground, and she clutched a dove in each hand. And when she arrived at the castle, she greeted the king, and she said, "Your Highness, as you can see, I have come to you neither walking nor riding, and wrapped in this fishnet I am neither dressed nor undressed." And the king laughed and said, "And the gift that is not a gift? Here," she said, and she presented him with the 2 doves, which promptly flew out the window. "That is indeed a gift that is not a gift," the king laughed. And he was pleased to see that Rachel was as pretty and kind as she was clever, and he asked her to marry him. He forgot his pride. He forgot that he was king of all the land, the most cleverest king that ever lived, and that she was simply an innkeeper's daughter. And she agreed to marry him. But then he remembered his pride, and he said, "Excellent, but you must promise never to meddle or disagree with any of my court decisions." "Very well," she agreed. And the king and Rachel, they lived happily for many years. Until there was one day when Rachel noticed a farmer in the courtyard, and he appeared very unhappy. And she went to him and asked him what was wrong. And he told her, "Well, I came to court on business, and I brought my mare with me, and my mare happened to give birth to a foal under my neighbor's cart. And my neighbor is now claiming that the foal belongs to him. And the king has ruled that indeed the foal is now my neighbor's property." Rachel was rather dismayed and somewhat embarrassed by her husband's decision in this matter. And she told the farmer, "Here's what you should do. Go and get a fishing pole and stand out in the courtyard and pretend to fish. And when the king sees you and asks what you are doing, this is what you should say. But don't tell him or anyone who told you to do this or say what I am about to tell you." Well, the farmer did as Rachel suggested. He got a fishing pole and he stood out in the courtyard beneath the king's window. And before long, the king looked out his window and saw the man standing there. And he called to him, "Hey, what are you doing? Are you daft? How do you expect to catch a fish in the middle of a dusty road?" And the farmer just looked at him and said, "Why, Your Highness, I am just as likely to catch a fish in the middle of a dusty road as a wagon is to give birth to a foal." The king realized the injustice of his earlier decision. And he also realized that there was only one person who was clever enough to come up with that retort. And he called Rachel to him, furious. "You have broken your promise to me. You have meddled in my judgments, and you must leave the palace." He was very angry with her, but his heart broke as he said these things, and yet his pride overpowered his love. "You must leave," he repeated. "But before you go, you may take with you the one thing that is most dear to you in the castle." "Very well," Rachel agreed calmly. "But we have lived together happily for so many years. Let us share one last meal together and recall all of the fond and happy times that we have shared, and then we may part as friends." The king agreed, and he brought out his choicest wines for the meal, and Rachel made his favorite dishes. And the king ate and ate and drank and ate and drank and drank, and before long he had fallen asleep at the table. And without waking him, Rachel called some of the servants over, and she wrapped the king in a blanket, and with the servants she carried him out into the night to the garden by her father's inn. And the next morning the king awoke to the sounds of birds chirping, and he found Rachel beside him, and he found that he had a throbbing headache. But he looked at Rachel and he asked, "What am I doing here?" And she looked at him and said, "I'm only doing as you advised. You said that I might take with me from the castle the one thing that is most dear to me, and that, my love, is you." And the king looked into her eyes, and he forgot his pride, this time forever. "Will you forgive me and return home with me?" he asked Rachel. "Of course," she said. "And will you perhaps on occasion discuss your cases at court with me?" "Yes," he agreed. And from that time on, whenever he was presented with a particularly challenging case, he would pause a moment and say, "Perhaps we should consult my wife on this matter. You know, she is a very clever woman." Thank you.
I think we have a theme going here of cleverness. I love to hear stories about clever people because my mind doesn't work that fast. I only think of these clever things like 3 days later lying in bed sleepless at night, and then I say, "Oh, I could have done that and it would have been clever." But do I think of it like these story people do. If you are looking at your brochure, your paper, you'll notice that Daria is next, and Daria is not here. So after I destroy the equipment here, I'm going to tell her story. I don't need that, do I? My name's Jenny Ritchie. The story that Daria was going to tell and that I am going to tell comes from Syria, and it is another clever woman. Some of us are born with a lot, and some of us are born with not so much. And it doesn't seem to matter how clever you are or how unclever you are as to which your circumstances are. Does that make sense? There was a very clever woman who was born in a poor village with not much at all. And despite her cleverness, which enabled her to survive, it did not enable her to put aside for her old age. And so she decided that she must go to the city to see what fortunes could be found there. And when she came to the city, she observed that the queen, who had huge flocks and herds and gardens and servants, the queen was easily amused by fortune tellers and by traveling jugglers, and not so much by study or intellectual pursuits. So the clever woman went to the queen and said, "Your Majesty, I have a secret." "Oh, you do?" "Yes, I can teach turkeys to talk in 7 different languages." "You can?" "It is a secret." "Oh, you could teach my turkeys to talk?" "Yes, ma'am, in 7 different languages. But it takes a while. It takes quite a few weeks to teach turkeys to talk even 1 language, and it will take 7 weeks to teach them to talk 7 languages. And of course, during that time, Your Majesty, I must focus on those turkeys." "You could teach my turkeys to talk in 7 weeks in 7 languages? I could have a party. I could have everyone come from the ambassadors from other nations. We could be out in the garden, and the turkeys would wander among them, talking to them in their own language. What a sensation! When can you start?" "Well, Your Majesty, you must give me the turkeys, and you must give me food and drink and wherewithal for 7 weeks of work." "Oh, no problem. I'll start planning the party now." And so the clever woman went home with a huge flock of turkeys and a long line of donkeys with provisions. And for 6 weeks, she ate and drank and lived well, and the turkeys did whatever turkeys do. And on the 6th week, she went back to the queen. "You're back already," said the queen. "How are my turkeys?" "Your Majesty, they are doing very well. They have already learned 6 languages, and they are well started on the 7th. "Oh, this is going to be so much fun. I can't hardly wait to hear them talking." "But, Your Majesty, there's a problem." "A problem? What sort of a problem?" "Your Majesty, the turkeys all say the same thing." "Oh, what do they say? What could be a problem?" "Your Majesty, in 7 different languages, the turkeys say, 'The queen has a lover.'" "Kill the turkeys. And here's a reward for your efforts, and I suggest that you lose the secret of teaching turkeys to talk." And that suited the clever woman just fine. She went back home with the wherewithal to live well on into her old age, and with a huge flock of turkeys, which she did kill 1 at a time, and 1 meal at a time. She disposed of the turkeys, who never talked again. over here. Flip it on there. Is that right?
Yes, the Queen has arrived. Thank you. My name is Pamela Smith, and I get to tell the story tonight that balances out all the cheerful ones. This is a story from the Hebrew Bible about King Ahab, and people often have heard of King Ahab from the Mendelssohn's oratorio, Elijah. Ahab and Elijah, the great dynamic in that oratorio. But there are many more stories about Ahab. The first book of Kings says Ahab, the worst king Israel ever had. He married the daughter of King Ishbaal of Sidon. Do you remember her name? Jezebel. Jezebel. She was a worshiper of Baal, and Ahab set up in Israel, in his city, an altar to Baal. And as if that weren't enough, one of those shrine grove pole things to the fertility goddess Asherah. Ahab was a pip. But let me tell you how he came to his death. In those days, Israel was divided into two kingdoms, Israel and Judah, and Ahab was the king of Israel. Now, for 3 years, the kingdom of Aram and the kingdom of Israel were without war. But in the 3rd year, Jehoshaphat, who was the king of Judah, came up to visit Ahab, the king of Israel. Ahab said to his officers, "Do you realize Ramoth Gilead belongs to us, and we are doing nothing to take it out of the hands of the king of Aram?" And Ahab said to Jehoshaphat, "Will you come with me to bring to in battle to win back Ramoth Gilead?" Jehoshaphat said, "I am as ready as you are. My horses are your horses. My men are your men." But Jehoshaphat also said, "Let us inquire first of the Lord." So Ahab summoned his prophets, 400 of them, and he said to them, "Shall I go to battle for Ramoth Gilead, or shall I refrain?" And the prophets said, "March, march and triumph. The Lord will put victory into the hands of the king." Jehoshaphat said, "Is there perhaps some other prophet of the Lord of whom we may inquire?" Ahab said, "There yet remains one more prophet, Micaiah ben Imlah. Micaiah, the son of Imlah. I hate him. He never prophesies anything good for me, only disaster." Jehoshaphat said, "Let not the king say such things." And King Ahab said, "Bring me Micaiah ben Imlah, quickly." Now, Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, and Ahab, the king of Israel, sitting in their royal thrones, dressed in their royal robes at the threshing floor outside the gates of Samaria. And all the prophets were raving around them. Zedekiah ben Chenaanah had made horns out of iron, and with these he said, "Thus says the Lord, with these horns Ahab will gouge the Arameans." And all the prophets were speaking in this wise: March, march and triumph. The Lord will deliver victory into the hands of the king. The officer who had gone to fetch Micaiah said, Look at this. All the king's prophets are in one accord. Let your word be like one of them. Prophesy something good. But Micaiah said, As the Lord lives, what the Lord gives me to say, I will say. So Ahab said to Micaiah ben Imlah, Shall I go forth to battle for Ramoth Gilead, or shall I refrain? And Micaiah said, March, march in triumph. The Lord will deliver victory into the hands of the king. Ahab said, How many times must I make you swear to tell me only the truth in the name of the Lord? Micaiah said, I saw the flocks of the people of Israel scattered on the hills like sheep with no shepherd. And I heard a voice cry out, These have no king. Let them go home to their own place. Ahab said to Jehoshaphat, Did I not just tell you he never prophesies anything good for me, only disasters? Micaiah said, Then listen to this word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne with all his hosts to his left, to his right, and to his left. And I heard the Lord speak. The Lord said, Who will tempt Ahab for me, that he may go to Ramoth Gilead and die? And one said one thing, and one said another, until a ruach, a breath, a spirit, said, I will do it. The Lord said, How will you do it? And the ruach said, I will go and be a ruach of lies in the mouth of all Ahab's prophets. Oh, the Lord said, You will tempt him, and you will succeed. Go and do it. And so you see, Ahab, it is not I who prophesies disaster for you. It is the Lord who has put lies in the mouths of all your prophets. Now Zedekiah ben Chenaanah came and slapped Micaiah across the face. Ugh. And he said, Just when did the Spirit of the Lord leave me and go into you? And Micaiah said, Maybe you'll find out on the day when you run home to hide in your privy. No, Ahab said to an officer, Take Micaiah ben Imlah to Joash, the governor of Amon, the governor of the city, and Joash, the king's son, and tell them, Put this man in jail and feed him only on bread and water until the king comes home safe and sound. And Micaiah said, If you come home safe and sound, the Lord has not spoken through me. And he called to everyone there, Witness this. Witness this. So Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, and Ahab, the king of Israel, went to battle for Ramoth Gilead. Ahab said to Jehoshaphat, I intend to wear the gear of a common soldier, but you, Jehoshaphat, wear your robes. So Ahab, the king of Israel, put on the gear of a common soldier and led Israel into battle in disguise. Now the king of Aram said to the captains of his 32 chariots, "Contend with no one, small or great, save only Ahab, the king of Israel." So when they saw Jehoshaphat, they wheeled to the attack. But Jehoshaphat let out his war cry, and the charioteers, seeing that this was not Ahab, ceased to pursue him. But one archer drew his bow, and by luck his arrow struck Ahab between the joints of his armor. "Turn back," Ahab cried to his charioteer. "Turn back, I am wounded." The battle grew fierce that day. They propped Ahab up in his chariot as though he were confronting the Arameans. And there he stood until towards evening he died, and the blood flowed out from his wound and pooled on the floor of his chariot. And at sunset, a cry went out over the battlefield, "The king is dead. Let each one go home in peace." So that was how Ahab died. They buried him there at Samaria, and they took his armor and his chariot to the pool at the gate of Samaria to be washed. And the city's street dogs came and lapped Ahab's blood off his armor and licked up his blood from the floor of the chariot. And this completed the words that Elijah had said, "Ahab, you thief, you murderer, where the dogs lapped up the blood of Naboth, they will lap up your blood as well." And as for all of Ahab's other great deeds and the cities that he founded and that ivory palace that he built for himself, are these things not written down in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? So Ahab slept with his fathers, and his son Ahaziah ruled in his place.
Well, I think we're moving from our clever part of the program to our power struggles because I have for you the second in my short story, Sprinklings, throughout the program. And it too is a power struggle between two great entities, the wind and the sun. And if they could just keep their arguments to themselves instead of bringing everybody else into it. In this Aesop fable, the wind and the sun were high in the air, up in the sky, when they had, yet again, another discussion, an argument, a disagreement about which was the most powerful, which of the two entities was the stronger. And back and forth they went, until finally they looked down onto the surface of the earth, and there they saw the answer to their power struggle. It was a human, a man, walking along a road, and he was whistling a little tune, his face up against the sun, and a little breeze blowing in his hair, and his cloak was billowing out behind him. And the sun said, "See that human? Let us each take a turn with our powers, and whichever one of us can make that human take his cloak off first, that will be the strongest of the two." "Agreed," said the wind. And the sun said, "Oh, you can go first." And the sun hid behind a cloud. And of course, the wind, knowing he would win, puffed up and headed out. And he started out soft at first, aiming a slight breeze down at that human walking on the road. And the man turned his face up eagerly to the wind. But then that power started in earnest, and it began to blow so hard that the man had to lean forward against the wind to make any progress. And before he knew it, he had to wrap that cloak even tighter around him than before. And so the wind blew out and gave up. "Your turn," he said to the sun. And the sun came out from behind the cloud, and he too started gentle at first, down on that tiny little human. And the human, he let go of his cloak and let it billow about him as he felt the sun. And then the sun, as we know and remember, right, can really turn it on. And it began to shine down on that little human, and the human began to wipe sweat from his brow, and pretty soon he had to take that cloak off and put it over his arm and carry it as he walked. "Aha!" said the sun. "I am the strongest. I won." And the wind, humble in defeat, blew away. And the moral of this Aesop fable is often said to be kindness or warmth is more effective than severity. Or you could also say to be nice is much better than to be a blowhard. Thank you.
All right, I'm back again. This time I have a story, and you can take with it what you will, moral or not. It's just a fun story for me to tell, and it's called The Pumpkin Child. And I'm afraid some of you have heard it before in the audience. And this is a story that comes from Persia. Once upon a time, a long time ago, there was a man and a woman who lived on the edge of town, and they loved each other very much. And they had enough of everything. And they were happy enough, except for one thing. The woman wanted a child, and she wanted a child so badly. And all of her friends had children, and she saw the warmth and the love in the homes, and she wanted that for herself and for her home. And finally she prayed, and she prayed, and she said, "Even if my child looked like a pumpkin, I would be happy. I want a child." And so she was given a child. That next month, she knew she was pregnant, and she carried the child. And when she birthed the child, it came out singing. And they looked in the child's face, and the baby opened her eyes, and her eyes were blue like sapphire, and her lips were red like pomegranate. Oh, she was lovely. And she and her husband doted on this child, and every morning they would go into the child's room and they would sing to the child to sing it awake. One morning, the man and the woman went to sing to the child at dawn, and they pulled back the blanket, and instead of a baby, there was a pumpkin. There was a pumpkin. And the man could not believe his eyes. In fact, he almost went blind. And he turned around and he grabbed a few things, and the woman never saw him again. But she stayed with her pumpkin child. And she picked her up and she kissed her, and she said, "I will never, ever leave you, and I'll always be your mother." And so the woman would go about her day with her pumpkin child on her hip. And she'd take her out into the garden, and she'd take her to the market, and she would take her wherever she went, and she held her head up very high because everyone laughed at her, and everyone laughed at her pumpkin child, but she didn't pay them any mind. And finally, she loved that child so much that it grew bigger and bigger like children do, and finally she couldn't carry the child anymore. So the pumpkin child had to roll around the house. So it rolled into the bedroom, and it rolled into the bathroom, and it rolled in the kitchen. It would roll outside to play occasionally. Even though the children laughed at her, she didn't care. She would just roll around during their games. Well, finally, the pumpkin child became big enough to go to school. And so the mother said, "All right, it's time. And remember, don't listen to anyone. You deserve to be there as much as everyone else." And so the pumpkin child didn't say anything, but rolled down the road. And she rolled into town, and she rolled right up the steps to the school for girls, where she was going to learn how to weave and sew. And so the lady opened the door. There was a pumpkin. Not a word said. She was expecting her. And the pumpkin girl ran and just rolled inside. And when it was lunchtime, the pumpkin girl rolled out into the courtyard with the other girls where they were all going to have their lunch. Well, it just so happened that at lunchtime, at the stroke of 12, there was someone watching those girls. He made a habit of watching them every day, in fact. It was a rich merchant's son, and he was hot. And he knew it. And he liked to sneak on and spy on these girls just to see what's what. So he would go up to the top of his father's building that overlooked the school for girls, and he would spy on these girls. And this particular day, he saw a pumpkin rolling into the yard, and he thought, how curious. And so he kept watching this pumpkin, and it didn't stop with the other girls. It just kept on rolling and rolling until it went to a bush at the far wall of the garden. And it went under the bush, and he kept watching it. And then out from the bush came the most beautiful girl he had ever seen, with eyes like sapphires and lips like pomegranates. And the girl scaled the wall that was covered in grapevines, and she ate a lunch of grapes. And when she'd had enough, she scaled back down, and out rolled the pumpkin back to school. Well, this guy could not believe his eyes. And he said, surely this won't happen again. So the next day he was there at the stroke of 12. There goes the pumpkin. There goes the girl. In go the grapes. Down goes the girl. Back goes the pumpkin. And it happened, and it happened. And finally he said, I've got to meet this girl. She's beautiful. She's the girl of my dreams. And so he snuck to the wall, on the other side of the wall. And he scaled. And he waited because he knew what was going to happen. And so the pumpkin girl scaled up the side of the wall, up the grapes. And he said, hello. And she said, and she slid down. But he grabbed her hand. But she slipped her hand away. And all that he had was a golden ring that was on her finger. And she went back down. She rolled away in a huff, as pumpkins can. And so the boy went in to tell his mother the news. And the mother was very glad to hear this news, because the news was her son was finally going to settle down. He was going to stop chasing girls, and he was going to marry at last and give her a grandchild. Oh, she could have wept. She was so happy. And she said, well, tell me, who is this girl? Who? And he said, well, I don't know her name, but this is her ring. And whoever you can find that fits this ring is the girl that I'm going to marry. Okay, so the mother thought about it. Okay, all right, fine. It was kind of a mystery. And so she called in her servant, Nana, who was her servant for many years. And she said, Nana, go to each woman's house and see which girl fits this ring so that my son can get married and our dreams can come true. And Nana agreed. And so she went from house to house, and soon word traveled fast. And so girls would starve themselves so their finger would fit into the ring, or they'd eat a lot of butter and fat so they would plump themselves up and to fit into the ring. But nothing they did seemed to work. And so Nana would go from house to house, and failure until she got to the edge of town where the woman lived. And she knocked on the door, and the pumpkin child's mother answered the door. And she said, hello, do you have a young lady here at this house? And the mother, who was so tired of being laughed at about her girl, said, please stop torturing me. You know that I have a pumpkin child. Well, this I've got to see, said Nana. May I see her? Fine. And so the mother let Nana in, and in rolled the pumpkin child. And Nana said, wow, wow. And the mother said, there she is. There's my pumpkin child. Now, what is your business? And so Nana said, well, I have this ring, and, well, my master said that whoever fits into this ring is his bride, and so I'm going around from house to house, and before she could say another word, a hand slipped from out of the pumpkin, grabbed the ring, and put it on, and went back down into the pumpkin. And Nana could not believe that either. And so she spun around. She didn't have another word to say, and she flew back to her master's house and told the mother everything. Well, the son came in, hearing the hullabaloo, and he said, "Be quiet. This is the one I've been waiting for. This will be my bride." And Nana said, "But it's a pumpkin! How are you going to have babies with a pumpkin?" "Never mind. I gave my word. It's going to happen." And so, the boy married the pumpkin. And everyone laughed as they went down the aisle. And everyone laughed when he said, "I do," and the pumpkin just stood still. And everyone laughed when he kissed that pumpkin right on the stem. And everyone laughed when they moved far away into the country, into their own mansion, and lived happily. But no one laughed the day that the girl appeared in bed that night, some night after many months of happy marriage. And the boy looked into his wife's eyes that were blue like sapphires, and he looked at her lips that were rich like pomegranate. And he said, "Why tonight?" And she said, "Because I know that you love me. You love me even though I was a pumpkin." And so they lived out their days very happy with lots and lots of kids, but they always kept that pumpkin shell there in their room to remind them of the time when he loved her even though she was a pumpkin. And that's the story of the pumpkin child.
Hello, my name is Mary Fraser, and I am here tonight with a story for you from Japan. It was first written down by Lafcadio Hearn, and it's been adapted many times. We have some lovely picture book adaptations of this story that you can come back and see another day. As I reflected on this story, I couldn't help but think about the importance of rice in Japan. Indeed, two of the most famous Japanese words that any of us in this room might know. Can you think what those two most famous Japanese words, most well known in America, might be? Maybe. How about Toyota? How about Honda? Both those names happen to refer to fertile rice fields or plentiful, bountiful rice fields. They are family names for those corporations, but they do refer to the bounty of the rice field, which for many Japanese peasants was all of their wealth, everything that they had. And so I have a story for you about a little village down by the sea. There were 90 homes there, 400 people. And when the weather was good, the children would play in the bay. It was a large bay, and the water was gentle there, and the children would play and laugh and run in the waves. But when there was a storm, the water would sometimes come up the shore as far as their houses, and the children, and indeed the men and women, everyone would run into their homes and shut the doors and wait for the storm to subside. Now, behind this small village was a tall mountain, and a road zigzagged up the side of this mountain. And there were ancient paddies where people over time had carved out flat places in the sides of the mountain so that they could raise rice there. And the people toiled in the rice fields all through the year. They would be there in the spring as the rain pelted their backs. They would toil up those roads in the summer out to their fields to work. And then when the grain was golden, they would go and harvest the rice. Now, at the very top of the mountain, there lived a very old, very wise man named Oji-san, which means grandfather in Japanese. And he lived there in this lovely house with his little grandson, whose name was Tada. And they lived there very happily. Now, one day, it was very hot and very still. And it was at the time when the rice was about to be harvested. So Oji-san and Tada were standing on the balcony of their house looking at their vast fields of rice, Ah, such wealth they saw there before them. They had worked so hard tending this rice all year, and they could see that they would have a bounteous harvest that would last them all through the year to come. They would have plenty to eat this year. And as Oji-san stood there looking at his field, his eye followed on down the zigzag road and down the other flat fields of the farmers below, kind of like golden stairs making their way down the side of the mountain. And he and his grandson looked down there together, and they could see far down in the village, oh, it was so far away, the people were like ants. They could see that they were planning a festival there. There were lanterns and there were flags hung, just hanging limply, though, because the air was so still and so hot. But they could tell that people were preparing to have a ceremonial dance in the courtyard of the temple there to celebrate the harvest. Oji-san looked up at the sky, and he looked about him and he said, "This is earthquake weather." And indeed, an earthquake came, not very long after that. But Tada was not afraid. It was not a particularly strong earthquake, and earthquakes happened all the time in Japan. But this one was a little strange because it went on so long and it shook so low, almost in a spongy way, as if something odd were happening out in the ocean far beyond the bay where their village was. And the house shook for a while, but then it stopped and all was quiet. And they stood there looking down and appreciating the day. But then Oji-san's sharp eye looked down at the edge of the water, and he could see that the water was rushing away there from the shore. And it kept moving out further and further and further out into the bay, and it was leaving behind wet sand there, and there were rocks festooned with seaweed, and though he couldn't see it, he was sure there were fish flopping there and crabs scuttling away, and he could see people from the village hurrying down there to the shoreline to look and see. It was such an odd thing. They had never seen such a thing, and they were even venturing out into the oddly rippled sand that had been exposed as the water continued to rush out further and further toward the ocean. And it was plain that the people didn't know what was happening. But Oji-san knew. Such a thing had never happened in his life, but his grandfather had told him about such a thing, and he knew that there was great danger. There was no time to send a message down the zigzag road of the mountain. There was no time to tell the priests to hit their temple bells, to sound the bells, the warning sound. There was no time to stand and think. Oji-san had to act, and so he said to Tada, "Run and fetch me a torch." And the little boy was very obedient. He loved his grandfather, and he did always exactly what the old man said. And so he hurried into the house, and he got a pine torch, and he kindled it there, and he brought it to the old man. And instantly, Oji-san walked up to a stack of his rice stalks, and he plunged the burning torch into it, lighting the rice. And it kindled instantly, just like dry tinder. And it began to burn, and then sparks flew and began to ignite other rice stalks nearby, and soon it was all alight and burning, and a great cloud of smoke went up into the air, a column rising up into the still air. And Oji-san just walked along, continuing to ignite all of the piles of his stalks of rice. And little Tada ran behind him, and he said, "Oji-san, why? Why, Oji-san, why? Stop." He was terrified. He thought his grandfather had lost his mind. But Oji-san didn't have time to stop and explain. All he could think of were 400 lives in danger below, and so he strode along, lighting all of his rice, his whole past year, his whole future, all of his wealth he was burning. And then he looked down, and he saw that the monks had looked up, and they had noticed it, and they began to pound the bell there to send the warning sounds. And all the people came up from the shore, and they began to hurry up that long road. And they ran up, and Oji-san, when he had finished firing all the rice, he just threw the torch down and waited. And he didn't have long to wait at all, because the fastest people had come up the mountain with pads. They were going to try to beat out the flames, and the old man held up his arms and he said, "Stop, let it be, let it burn. I want all the people to come. There is great danger." And soon the people did come. the men and boys and the women and girls who were the fastest runners, and then the young women with babies on their backs, and then the elderly began to toil their way up the zigzag road of the mountain. And then poor little Tata began to cry, and he said, "I'm afraid my grandfather has lost his mind. He set fire to the rice himself. He burned our rice." And the old men looked at Oji-san and the young men, and they said, What does this mean? What can it mean?" And Oji-san said, "Is everyone here?" "Yes, it is true. I burned the rice. Is everyone here?" And the men said, "Yes, everyone is here. We have all come to save your fields, you old fool. Have you lost your mind? Have you gone mad? Are you going to burn our fields as well?" And they raised their fists in anger to threaten him. But Oji-san just pointed out to the sea and said, "Look." And everyone turned and looked, and it was so far and so distant, there was no water as far as the eye could see, but there seemed to be a strip of land where no land could possibly be, had never been, could never be. And then that strip of land seemed to grow wider and thicker and darker, and it came closer and closer, and then it appeared to be a great cliff of water, and it was moving toward the people faster than a kite can fly. And suddenly everyone understood, and the people shrieked, "Tsunami!" And then all ability to make sound, to hear sound, was gone as a thunderclap seemed to hit as the water rushed up and hit the shore. And then there was a great burst of foam like lightning. And then there was just a foam as it made its way, spray coming up the side of the mountain. The people turned and scattered and ran in fear. And after a minute, they came back and they looked down and they saw the foamy white sea raging over the shoreline, raging over the place where their village had been just moments before. And they watched in amazement as that water clawed out great gouges of sand as it made its way back into the bay. And then it came and struck again. And then it ebbed away and struck and ebbed and struck and ebbed, but each time with less strength, until finally it stopped in its ancient bed where it had always been, although it raged as if it were a typhoon. No one said a word, just silence. They all looked down at the shore where their homes had been, and there was nothing left. There was no village. Just some bamboo poles and bits of thatch along the shore. And then little Tara came up and he took his grandfather's hand in his and he said, "Oji-san, now I understand. Now I know why you burned the rice." And it dawned on everyone. The men all knelt, and then everyone else knelt down to give thanks to Oji-san. And they looked up at their neighbor's face, their wise old neighbor. They had always come to him for advice, and they looked at him now and saw he was as poor as the poorest among them. All of his wealth was gone. But he had saved 400 people. The old man stood tall and he said, "My house is still standing. Come, there is room for many." And the people never forgot what they owed to Oji-san. They couldn't make him wealthy again, but they did rebuild their village. And when they built the temple, they put his name in gold over the temple door so that no one would ever forget the sacrifice of the old man who saved the people when he burned his rice. And that story is called The Wave. Thank you.
Moment of silence after that one. Wow. So we are skipping the story for time's sake. That is the Hound story. And so move down your program to voodoo. And this is the third of my short story offerings tonight, and so it is also one of my favorite of the three. It's short, but not so sweet. Mrs. Decker had just come back from a 2-week vacation at Haiti. She needed a cooling off period from her husband because before she'd left for her vacation, they had been at each other's throats, a divorce imminent. But would it work? Would a little time off help? No. She had not even unpacked her suitcase, and they were at it again, arguing back and forth. Finally, she just threw her suitcase down on the bed and she said, "Half! I want half of everything, half of all the money, half of all the property. I deserve it." And he said, "Ridiculous." "Oh, you think so, is it? You know I could have it all easily. I learned voodoo in Haiti, and I could have it all, and you'd have nothing." And he said, "Rot. Oh, you don't understand the art of voodoo, do you? I've learned it, and did you know that I could kill you with this art form, and no one would even know? They would think it was a heart attack, and you'd be gone, and I'd have it all." "Nonsense." "All right, then, if you don't believe it, just give me a little bit of your fingernail, a little bit of your hair, perhaps. And I have the wax figure, I have the hat pin. This is the deal. I will perform the voodoo on you. If you live, I promise not to ask for anything in the divorce. You'll have it all. But if you die, I have it all, don't I? What do you think, And he said, "Deal." And so, looking at his short, freshly clipped nails, he headed into the bathroom to clip a few pieces of hair from his head. When he came back into the room, hair in the palm of his hand, he looked at her. She was warming the wax effigy, working it this way and that. She plucked the hairs from his hand and started pushing them into the warm wax until she had it just where she wanted. She placed the wax figure right there on the table, and then she took a ridiculously long, sharp hat pin, and she poised above the figure, and she said to her husband, she said, "You are going to be so very, very sorry." And then she plunged down right where the heart would be. Well, Mr. Dexter was more surprised than sorry. He didn't really believe in voodoo, but he was a very cautious man, and besides, it had always bothered him how she never cleaned her hairbrush. Does anybody need some help with that? Was it his hair?
The last story tonight in our little section on Haiti. The last story that I have to tell you is a Haitian folk story. And I tell it because as I was listening to NPR, the news, it talked about how the people in Haiti, although they've had a nightmarish, horrible experience, have started to come into the streets. And when they come into the streets together, they sing, they dance, they tell stories, and then sometimes they cry. And so this is a story of joy, of silliness. It is a trickster tale from Haiti. Now, the king of Haiti loved dancing. And he would have dancers come every night and perform for him, except that he didn't have enough money in the treasury to pay them. So he couldn't have dancing every night. Well, one evening, he was sitting in his garden, and maybe some of you have done this, and a little line kind of went through his mind. Kokikiro, kokikiro, la la la, kokikiro, kokikiro, la samba, kokikiro, la samba. Oh, I like that, he said. I think I could do a dance with that.
and he began to dance. Kokikiro, mastamba. Kokiro, mastamba. I can dance like this. I can dance like this. Kokikiro, mastamba. Kokikiro, mastamba. Samba dance, samba dance, samba dance, samba dance. I love it. Oh. And he got to thinking some more. So the next day, he let it be known that anyone who could figure out the Kokikiro dance, that person he would give 5,000 gordes. And that was a lot of money. Well, it went out to everyone, and they began to line up. They were all dancers. Everybody in Haiti dances, and some were better than others. But they lined up, and one by one, they tried to figure out the steps of the Kokikiro. And he, the king, saw wonderful dancing. But nobody could figure out those steps to the Kokikiro. Well, time went on. Every night he had wonderful dancing, and every once in a while, somebody would get really close to figuring out the Kokikiro. But even if they got the very beginning of it, or sometimes even if they got the second part of it, they could never figure out the third part of it. And so months went by. The king loved this. But every night, after all the dancers had gone away, and after all the servants were gone, he would dance the Kokikiro. And he would dance like this. Kokikiro, masamba. I can dance like this. And I can dance like this. Samba dance, samba dance, samba dance, samba dance. Nobody saw me. But one night, the gardener, Malise, had come back to the palace to get his hat. He needed it. And he heard the Kokikiro dance. Looked in, and there was the king. And Malise thought, I will watch very carefully, and I will get the 5,000 gordes. And he watched, and he memorized, and quietly he went away. Well, the next morning, Malise talked to his wife and Madame Malise and told her what he had seen. And he had a plan. And the plan involved his friend, Boki. Now, Boki was not very bright. And Boki was not very graceful. But Malise thought he was the perfect one to teach the kokioki. And so he approached his friend and said, Boki, I am going to do something great for you. Oh, said Boki. He knew that Malise was a trickster, and every time he went to do something great for him, well, Well, it was better before he did something great for you. Let's just leave it alone. Oh, but Boki, how would you like to win 5,000 Gordons? I have seen the king. I can't do the dance myself, the kokioki, but you could do it. The king would suspect me, but I will teach it to you. And so he did the steps of the kokioki. And Boki said, all right, I will try. Koki, kokio. Huh? We'll work a little bit every night on this, said Malise, and then you can do it. So they worked on it every night. 2 months later, Boki and Malise were waiting in line with the dancers. People were still coming in and dancing for the king, trying to figure out the kokioke. And still no one had come up with it. Well, Malise did not go in with Boki. He sent him in. And here came Boki. And the king could not believe it. For Boki, this slow-moving, big fellow, did the kokioke. It wasn't pretty. But it was the kokioke. The king was flabbergasted. The king was amazed. Oh. The king was stunned. But he handed over the 5,000 Gordes. And Boki, thank you very much! And off he ran with the sack. And he met up with Meles. And they started talking about how Boki could feed his many little Bokis that he had at home. But Meles, he had a lot of little Malies at home too. And so they were running through the forest when suddenly Meles stopped. He said, I have another dance that I could teach you. Another dance? I'm very good at dancing, said Boki. Well, Meles said, it goes like this. If you have no sense, set your sack on the ground and dance. And dance. Oh, that's easy, said Boki. And so he started to dance. If you've got no sense, or put your stack on the ground and dance, and dance, and dance. You've got no sense, put your sack on the ground and dance. Dance. If you've got no sense, put your sack on the ground and dance. And dance. And Molly's joined in and they were in a swirl. And they had their eyes shut and they were whirling around and singing and dancing. And Boki stopped. Because as he had danced, Madame Malise had come out from behind the breadfruit tree and sneaked off with his sack. My sack! My sack is gone, said Boki. And Malise said, did you put your sack on the ground? I warned you about that. And off ran Malise, and Boki was not left holding the sack. And that is a story from Haiti, a trickster story, about that trickster Malise and his sidekick, Boki. Thank you all for coming tonight. Please stay with us for some refreshments that will be right behind this very curtain. Oh, Lordy.